Well, good afternoon, everybody. I was telling somebody they would get hackling me or telling me you've been here a long time, and yeah, since '79. So how many years that is? Been up at the roundup here. This is the first time I've been in the army, though. Usually I'm up in the main room, so I don't know if this is a demotion or what, but we'll take it for what it's worth. But anyway, it's good to be here. I'm going to kind of just go through parts of canola, and I'm going to go back, like my slide shows back. Probably even some things I got from, excuse me, 15 years ago that I think are pertinent that we need to be aware that could show up in the next 2 to 3 years. So I'm going to kind of jump back and forth, but I just want to get through a few things here. Back to my time. No, this is not new to anybody, but this is our canola growing areas of the state, and the arrows up are obviously the counties where acres increase. And probably of note, up in Pembina County, the acres are up, and surprising you get up that way. There's a lot of good Red River Valley land, and then there's marginal land, but there was some canola growing right south of Cavalier along 18. And I didn't talk to the guy specific, but according to, ran right around that 35 to 4,000 pounds, quarter after quarter. So I don't know if that's going to change their deal next year, but just beautiful canola. I think what happened there, excuse me, is it got to be a late spring. We know we get into June, and I've always said this, I'll say a few things here. June seeded canola is preferred over actually May 1st, and that kind of is a big switch. But if we get into June, and that's what happened there. So this is, excuse me, the US look. I think this is a big thing that'll drive canola. I've been to a lot of meetings the last few years, and you guys have too. And this renewable diesel, biodiesel, we know we can use canola in the biodiesel, but renewables a big thing, because when it goes through that process, it's ready to go in the tractor. Your equipment doesn't need any more refining, so that's going to be big. And I think it's just very well known with canola with a high percent oil. I put this slide in from 2020. Some of you will recall that up north where where we had the heavy rains and we couldn't get the canola harvested, so there was swaths left north of Langdon that people were asking, is it going to burn good? Because they knew in the spring, these swaths, we have to get them burned, and nobody was really sure. But when they lit them there, this is, I think, like May 20th, just that fuel just fueled it. It burned so black and coal, so you can just see what that, and obviously it's an oil, so it'll do that. But I thought that's a very neat picture. I'm gonna have to do something on this, try to look for a cough drop. I showed this slides, if you guys have been here, this one several years, and we kept touting a canola. Its main player is on the farm bill, the PLC payments. And obviously they were excellent through all those years. It might be a little low, the chart for you guys in the back. But then the last 2 years with the good prices, no PLC payment. So it isn't quite the advantage, but we do have that guarantee if things change. So this is from the Northern Canola Growers. So in North Dakota, $436 million has been paid out to canola alone for the PLC ARC. So that's a big thing, and you guys all know that. Now, this is a factor that I think, as we're looking at the new farm bill coming up, all the commodity groups are kind of battling for their spot. And canola did so well, and oil sunflowers, the minor oil seeds at that 20 cents a pound. Basically, that was your floor price. And so now with the new farm bill coming, these are reference prices now, they're going to be tweaking them. Every commodity feels they really got gypped comparing to canola. So wheat is going to try, obviously, get that above 550, and it'll go higher. It has to. Corn at 370, soybean at 840, and they felt the most discriminated because canola was at 20 cents a pound. Through this entire 8 years that we've compiled so far, 9, wheat has paid a PLC 1 year, and that's a price loss. It was below that price. Corn a few times. Soybean has never paid a PLC payment, and yet canola did 7 years in a row. So it'll be interesting to see with the farm bill how that'll shake out. So our lobbying group, you guys are very fortunate with the Northern Canola Growers. They're on top of things, and they'll really help you out. On the crop insurance, that's been a big driver of all your crops. For this coming year, you guys all know that you aren't sure what you're going to grow, but that crop insurance price that's set in February, we'll know it in March, is going to drive a lot of what you're going to plant. And last year in blue here, that's the spring price at 30 cents. Fall was what, 27? I think the spring looks like it should be 29 to 30, but that'll all be set as we hit the month of February. And that's using the November canola futures in Canada. This is kind of my review. I'm going to go back, and some of you guys, a lot of canola growers out here I see, you'll remember some of these years. I just kind of highlighted the last, 17 years. 2007 stuck out in my mind as just a disastrous year. The first time ever. And then what happened there, I'll talk about Aster Yellows in a bit, totally unexpected. And we went through and everything, trend deals just keep going up. Then we hit 2012. I see some guys from Munich and Olson here, 2012. Aster Yellows exploded again. There's no control. And guys just quit growing canola in Cavalier County. Everybody's saying Cavalier County's king, but that year hit guys so hard. We didn't have a good crop insurance program then. So 2012, Aster Yellows came in. And I kind of been expecting it off on the year, so I'm not forgetting about them. And I have a few tips that if we think leafhoppers are showing up, or if you hear reports, we'll address that in just a bit. But just keep that in mind. That's kind of the flow chart I want to go through. I bring this up all the time, but canola, that's its advantage, that ability to just reflower. You break the top off, anything happens, and every leaf axis, auxiliary bud will form. You'll get another seed head, and that's why the chart showed, this old chart, that it'll produce over 50% more flowers than it needs or will hold. And so if we do have a hiccup in the road, we get, let's say, a week of warm weather or good weather, and then a week of hot, few days, it'll knock the flowers back. We cool off again, get a rain, it'll go back up. So those yields just kind of hang on. And this is kind of an example here on your main, gotta find my pointer. On the main stem here, see a bunch of missing pods here, and that may have been from a hot stretch somewhere. And then the weather turned out, and then the set pods again. So that's that ability of canola that we all know. It's so forgiving, and that's really why it does well. Anything we look at, you guys are all listen to the consultants here a little while ago. It's just history, and I think we've all learned. I've been pretty active in all that 50 crop years now, because when I was in high school, we followed things close, and in college, and we got to go back, and what we learned one year, and just keep that in mind, what worked good this year probably won't work next year. And I think we all know that. I mean, you've been around long enough, you young guys, you know that what Dad said and that, but last year was that year. I heard the agronomist talk about it. I'm just going to mention this as a comment. I have never in all these years seen a year where we planted that late or seeded, depending on which crop, and to get that kind of yield. And I'm saying that because of a warm and cool season. When have you ever heard of June 15 planted wheat in my history running 65 or 70 bushels with quality? It's just really never happened till 22. Plant soybeans first week of June or two, get 50, 60 bushels on ground that you'd hope for 40 or 30 on a good year. So it's just one of them years, the cool season and warm season just excelled. And we've seen that kind of where they both did good, but it was the earlier spring, you had good planting dates. Here, everything was rushed in and demand first week of June. We had barley reseeded because of some damage up north of Langdon, I believe, and don't quote me, but it was in like July 15th. Talked to us, well, there's no way they'll make it. No, it harvested decent barley. And that these things that you've just never seen or heard of, we hope we can repeat that, but just keep that in mind as we're thinking about this next year. I mean, it's good, it's interesting, but we were pretty blessed this last year. Just a little bit on varieties. You guys, the seed companies are keeping you all informed on that. You got the Roundup Ready, Liberty, Clearfield. This is a new canola that, and I just mentioned it because we hear on these farm meetings about winter canola, like winter wheat. This is from Brian last year at the research center. That's the winter wheat. Everything was green, or the winter canola just isn't doing it up here, guys, at all. So hopefully they'll improve varieties. When you hear about trying this winter canola, try to talk about the wind. I drive to work from Park River to Adams every day, almost every day. And that wind this spring was just horrific when you had to stop on the road, and every one of you farmers just can't stand to see that. Even if it's not your ground, you don't like to see it, but it was just horrendous. So this minimum reduced tillage, we do have to get it thinking about that a lot more when we have fields that are susceptible to erosion. I mentioned this as poor picture. I thought it'd show up better here. 21 after the wind, you see these canola plants. I wish we could zoom in more, but anyway, there's some that toppled over here just hanging by a thread, and that's already drying up. These here plants are they're still green. So you look at the field after a windstorm, say, well, they're still green, but these are pinched at the soil line. And in this particular row, there's only 3 plants that made it to maturity, and that's this guy and this. So if you go out there after a wind and say, oh, it's not so bad, Take a close look. If they're pinched at the soil line and fall over, that plant will likely not recover and produce. So then you get out and we got to get ready to reseed, because that's a big thing. I think replanting, do it in time, but we know we can do it late. But keep that in mind on any field you're looking at after. This is ideal. You got a lot of, you're not going to have that wind erosion there, but how do we get the seeds to germinate in those conditions? And I always, for new canola growers, I always say this canola stubble for next year is just ready to go for wheat or whatever we want to go in there with. And I'm going to mention this, and probably they don't agree, but typically with canola, it's like with corn, you shouldn't put it on summer fallow because of fallow syndrome. Typically, you shouldn't put corn after canola because you can't get the same effect. You don't have the mycorrhiza. But up in Cavalier County, there was probably 400 acres put back on canola ground and fertilized heavily. So if you fertilize it good, get the phosphates out there, 170 bushel corn. So some things you hear, it isn't going to happen every year, but I thought that was interesting. All the factors on getting your good stand, just go through your soil moisture. We all know that's a big factor. Temperature. I put seeding depth, and I mention this every year, and it's interesting. You talk to some agronomists, Canada, wherever, they'll never go over an inch deep, seed half inch or less. Only time I would seed half inch of what I've seen is if that forecast says, let's get the seed in the ground today or tomorrow, it's going to rain the next 2 days. If there's no chance of rain, I would not seed at a half inch. I absolutely wouldn't. I'd get it either to moisture and then just you hope for the best, or you're going to hope for the best. What I'm trying to say is, you envision right now, half inch, look at that. If it's sunny out the day you go in with that seeder, it's going to dry out to that depth, just absolutely within a half a day. So we either have to get it down on a firmer surface and shoot for that inch. I'd rather shoot for an inch than half inch. Like I say, unless above you know it's going to rain the next 2-3 days, then you have a chance. But keep that in mind. Seed placement, I better keep going here. Seed soil contact. This is, I think, you guys with any crop, and this is what you've known over the years, but it's good to remind ourselves of that as we're trying to place that seed of any crop, that seed soil contact. And this obviously on the left is what you don't want. You just a little bit of soil touching that seed. And so this got to absorb that moisture in the soil. So this is water, and it's going to take a lot longer to germinate and so on. On the right here, good seed soil contact. When that soil is pressed right around that entire seed, then it'll pull water from every side. And those are conditions where, like canola, within 3-4 days, it's probably already germinating and out. So that's a big factor, but it's tough to accomplish with our minimum till. And I'll just point out a few things. Hairpinning, I think all of you heard of, but it's something that we do have to always keep in mind, and there isn't really the right answer. This is ideal soil contact. Got some, we'll talk about some row openers here, but this is a mess. When you got a disc drill and you're going into stubble, and that disc cannot really cut the stubble, so you're actually pushing it down with the seed, and then you got that straw right there, and it's going to wick that moisture right out. So seed soil contact, we like our minimum till. It's really tough. Actually, the guys that I know are air seeding with your Eagle Beak, they actually can do a better job of this. You're pushing that residue away, packing it on instead of pushing it down with. So I'm not favoring either or. For some conditions, the disc will be better, but that's a factor we need to keep in mind. So a lot of this technology, these 15-inch wide row planters with these crash cleaners. And we had the canola meeting last year in Langdon. We had a panel of farmers with 20-inch row spacing, or 22, 15, and the 6 or 7.5. And most of them all said, cut the stubble as high as you can. And I think as we're custom guys are out there, say, well, cut a little lower. It's not to get snow, but that upright stubble that your disc drill will find its way through, where this here looks pretty good all spread out, but you got all that trash laying down that disc, or is just going to push that seed in, so we aren't going to get that good seed soil contact. It'll push the residue with it. So that's kind of and so all the guys out west, they do a lot of no-tilling. They all say just cut higher rather with those combines, as high as you can. This is smaller print than I thought it'd be back there, guys, but just talking about vital for that seed trench. Just keep that in mind when you're out there, no matter what equipment and ground. Where's that seed going to be laying? There's a lot of different, these row cleaners, fast track, reveal. There's several of them. That's up with your equipment dealer. There's another look at it. There's a good row cleaner. It's got a gauge wheel here, so you don't go too deep with it. The disc coming behind it. So there's a lot of good things, but you guys, every one of you got to, is it worth it? Is it worth your investment on the farm? How many acres are you going to have and what you're going to do? So you can't just say, oh, that's a nice piece of equipment. Yeah, this precision A, or let's go with this reveal opener. Is it worth the cost? And that's what each of you have to weigh for what your equipment you have now. So here's just a couple examples of the fast track and reveal. That maybe doesn't always look the best, but you get on top of it from the road, it'll look terrible, but it's coming in real good. This is the guy out west. And then they keep looking and it's getting better. And here it's almost bolting and the field looks beautiful. So that residue is good for a lot of reasons. I'm putting this here, just get out there once in a while, just measure to see what you're doing. Because those plants that have come in late or a little spindly, they're just taking moisture away from the good plants. So our spacing, the better we can do, the better we'll end up with a yield. This is kind of a bad picture too. I just thought I'd show it better, but here's 4 plants were seated close together. We had a wind, they kind of pushed aside, and these are going to actually hurt each other later. These upright ones are going to hang in there better. And once you're into this stage, you can't do much about it. So it's when we're obviously planting is when you need to keep track of it. I mentioned this, our row spacing. I kind of mentioned these are all different options, and it's kind of what you guys have for equipment, what you can make do with. You want to invest a lot of money, you get a new planter. We got guys looking at the 15-inch. Maybe they're looking with their soybean as well. So you kind of have more use for it. So all these will work. They'll work very well. I say broadcast. You know, broadcasts will work good. And when I say broadcast, some are thinking with the world broadcasters. No, it's with your fertilizer applicator, with the granular applicator. You can get that rate down right. There's one guy, first-year grower, is in Walsh County. Broadcast seeded and harrowed it in, and 3,100 pounds in the elevator. So it can work, but got to rain the next day. I mean, if there's, again, no forecast for rain, I don't know if I'd do much with the broadcast seeding. This thing's got automatic speed, if you notice, it's getting ahead of me, so that's keeping me going. Here's just some local things from 17, but some of these different trials that guys did, these are field tests. 22-inch spacing. It's pretty wide, but again, if you got corn equipment and you want to utilize it for canola, it can work, and there's been some very successful, and you do cut the seeding rate and things like that. Another one, that's 3,000 pound, 2016. Seeding rates, seed companies don't like us talking much about, but they do know that you know, seed count's important, but we do need to make sure that crop stands. I think that's the biggest thing with canola. And as soon as we push the seeding rates up high and we end up with lodging problems, we've got disease and we've got lots of things going against us. So I think if we can maintain a good stand, but the thinner, we get bigger plants and so on. Originally, Brian, at the station, I think they still seed at 600,000 pure live seeds. So that should hopefully get you 12 plants per square foot. And now basically we're hoping to establish 5 to 7 will give you as big a crop as you would want and need. And that's really ideal. So that's about 220 to 300,000 plant population. And I got to back up, it went too quick again. And this is what's so interesting. Wherever you read literature on canola, 60 to 70% emergence is the best they typically get in Canada. So you see that, and so you got to account for that. Again, as part of that seed soil contact, all those kind of things. So keep that in mind. I bring this up, like the actual research plots. That's what I always like to see. This is Brian's work from 2010. This year, you really have to look close and just admire it of what thin canola can do. This is May 21st planting date. It was a planting date study. And I guess you can't, I got it in the wrong color, but the 26% stand. So on 600,000 planted, is $150,000 or 150,000 plant population, and up just about a little under 2 pounds an acre, and yielded 3,500 pounds, the top yield. So that, and that's actually counted and that's replicated. It ain't that farmer with the one stripped down. So it's replicated, and that tells a pretty big story there of how canola can do well. I'm going to skip through some of these a little quicker because as you see on there, there'll be a kind of a grower panel after the next 2 speakers. So I'm going to save some of this if there are questions on it, but I just want to highlight a few things. They talked about earlier about planting rye. Like there's a lot of rye in Western Walsh County as a cover crop, and then they're planting edible beans in there and soybeans, working pretty good. Canola, there's an allopathic effect from rye on weeds, and the small seeded canola, there is an effect. In Canada, they said you can't do it. You need to wait at least 2 weeks before you'd even think of planting the canola after you kill the rye. Well, this is a field, a rye by canola planted into it by Adams, and it did really well. So again, what works one year won't, but how much do you chance? So keep those things in mind. Fertilizer cost is a big thing. Everybody keeps telling us about it, and you guys know too. With canola, sulfur is a big thing, and you need nitrogen. Let's just say for nitrogen, we'd like 150 pounds actual nitrogen on that field where you're going to plant canola. So that's with your ground or with your in soil already, what you have in the soil test. So 150, some are going higher, but that's kind of the level. But the sulfur deficiency, when you get to these gray eroded knolls, you know, after you combine, it starts greening up again that those plants didn't produce their maximum yield because it's probably short on sulfur. So if you're going to be short on money on your sulfur, concentrate on some of them eroded knolls. We get to eastern Cavalier County and the escarpment. There's some soils there that are low in sulfur, but the rest we're doing pretty good, but we don't want to forget sulfur. Oops. I just did the prices here, and this is our prices as of the other day. AMS 520 a ton, urea 7.25 percentages. So I think the minimum we should put on is 10 pounds of sulfur. Some guys are going 20 to 25 actual sulfur, but I think 10 will get most soils through just fine. And that costs you on 10 pounds, $3.90 an acre. When you calculate the value of AMS, has that nitrogen in it. So we take urea price in there. 20 or 15 pounds should be plenty on a lot of it. So $5.85 an acre at 28-cent canola, 21 pounds is all it takes to get that back. So yeah, our fertilizer prices are high, but if we can keep good commodity prices, it's a big difference. If we had 15-cent canola or 12, it'd be a lot different. But anyway, just don't short on sulfur. You can't see again in the back, sorry about that, but nitrogen sulfur ratio 7-to-1. Some of our soils guys say, you know, you don't worry about a ratio, but it's very important. I give the story back in, you didn't quote me again, I said how long I've been in, it's somewhere in the mid 80s. Back in the day, obviously we had wheat and canola, and farmers did a lot of anhydrous, the anhydrous. And back in the day, this was east of Langdon, so if you guys that are west, you do a better job. But anyway, so had them applicators, you rented it, instead of lifting up the applicator and shutting it off, you just made your circle. I guess it's better to see me. You just kind of kept it in the ground. You had this little triangle right in the middle, kind of a round triangle, and you didn't have anhydrous on there, and then you finished the field. And then we had a call, and we had a soil specialist then from Fargo come up. Wherever he missed with the anhydrous, there was nice canola. Wherever the anhydrous was, the canola plants were there, but they just didn't set seed, just short pods. So what happened is that area excess nitrogen, and it got short on sulfur. So we excess nitrogen, high, you do need to add sulfur. If you got high nitrogen, you have to use sulfur. So that was very interesting to see that little loop. And so the whole field, it wasn't about an acre, but absolutely where that little loop was, that was good canola. The rest was just poor, like 500 pounds. So it was just an amazing thing to see. And once you see that, you never forget. So that's why I just stress that nitrogen sulfur ratio. I think it's important. We can talk about that later. I don't think if there's any other questions, but that's one that sticks out in my mind for the last 30 years. The straight cutting, that's the end thing now, right, guys? I mean, there's a few that are swathing yet. I just show this again, 2005, Brian's in the room, the data when they harvested this, August 5th, August 8th, and August 15th, the different stages. This is only like 30, the third color change when you're kind of recommended swathing. This was 60, this was over 60. But anyway, then they harvested the yield, and it went from 2,200 pound if you swathed it too early to 3,100 if you just gave it another 10 days in that case. So that's why the straight cutting is working better, because we're letting that seed fill, we're letting them pods fill. I think they finally changed it. I just looked at the weed guide, because what it was saying on your desiccation to 60% seed color change when we recommend swathing, but we would reglowing of these, we'd like closer to 90%. I think the weed guide, they changed it to 80 now. Because if you have a hot stretch of weather and you put those products on, it's going to happen quick. And if that seed isn't ready, if it isn't filled, you sure don't want to rush it. So that's why we need more seed color change. So these are the different things we estimate for your desiccants. And we go in 4 to 7 days, round up 1 to 3 weeks, and natural dry down. There's a lot of guys that are doing that. You talk to these farmers out west, the bigger farmers, they don't desiccate at all. And farmers around here think, God, I don't know how they can do it. Probably a little different land, but they're just letting it naturally ripen out in the field. So keep that in mind. But this last fall, when everything got so late, our desiccation wasn't the funnest thing. When we started to put it on in October, the days were short, they were cooler, and it still took a month to get ready to combine. So it was kind of it was obviously a different fall, but in most years, desiccating will work better. Took a picture of this field. This was a natural die down this last year, October 6th taken, and it was a very good yield. And you can see the one pass, and there's no question that was good canola. There's another field from the year before, a natural dry down. And what one guy, a few guys from like the Milton area were a lot of canola. I guess I got the next slide too. That's a poor top show. But if you're get done harvesting a canola field straight, and you've got green stubble across that field, that's probably a big crop. If the stubbles are is brown and that, it probably had disease. It had this verticillium wilt or blackleg, you name it. But if it's green, you likely had a very good pod fill up there, and it's a good yield. So kind of that's an observation like you guys are telling me this year. And get some pod drop. Just reminders, I guess we're okay. On clethodim, just make sure we aren't flowering or close to bolting, because the clethodim really knocked some fields back this last year. Huge yield loss. And they say it wasn't bolting, but it must have been the pods just aren't setting. They go right. I think that's about it. Just a note here, like on our wheat, 3 to 4 leaf, 5 leaf stage, we're developing the head. And same thing with canola, in 3 to 4 leaf stage, real small. That's when it's developing its reproductive ability. So keep that in mind. We don't want stress early on it either. I put this out, and I know they had a weed thing, and everybody can see what this is or can't. A poor picture, I thought it'd be better. This is a plot. And it's actually, let's put it, to be honest, it's my garden. There's an area in the garden where I wanted to fallow. So I had this hoe that you just cut the top off all the time, just go through it. So anyway, so I was there is like in October, and when all these little orange things. Well, this is a quarter, first of all, a quarter. And that little pigweed plant, so you could talk about, that's what if there's no, we kept cutting it off. So it just flowered right at the ground and put set pot or seeds. So it's full of seeds. And I looked at it, oh, there's nothing there. So compensation with these weeds, they have a little competition. They're going to get tall and try to get out of the way. Like water hemp will get yay high and all the Palmer amaranth. But if you stress it, but it'll start just setting seed lower and flowering. So this was cut off several times. So I thought, summer fallow, no weeds. No, it was full of little weed seeds and seedlings all over. So just an observation. We're going to talk about flea beetle shewel in a bit, but I just want to point out before Anita gets up is that these flea beetles, they're nasty in this little pitting, and we got to look at that growing point. And sometimes she'll talk about it, but just it hits you really hard and quick on one hot day. That plant can be gone. Bertha armyworm, your best scout I mentioned before is because your crop consultant and big guys like me, we can't walk out there. But if you see blackbirds out there, you probably have armyworm issues or some insect, because they'll find them. And this is the diamondback moth. If you look at this field, and this was in 19 in Cavalier County, it's all of a sudden turning white, and we know there's something wrong there. And sure enough, diamondback moth hit. A few tips on that, and it just whitens, sucks the green right out of the pods. And here's the end result. In August of 15 or 21, we had the same thing. That's the little culprit there, little pupa on there. And here's a pod where they were feeding on it, and you can see the seed shelled out where one they weren't. So a huge loss. But once we see that, the damage is pretty well done, so we have to be on it. So what I'm saying, my point on that to remember is if we get through that July, if we're in July, late July, everything's flowering and setting pods in August, and we aren't getting those big rains, it's kind of misty showers, start thinking of diamondback moth. Typically that little larva, if you get some hard rains, it washes it off the plant, and they just can't make their way back up. But if you get a period without any rain, and that's what happened in 19 and 21, about 3-4 weeks without any rain, that they just multiplied and just started to really take hold. So if you're getting some heavier rains, I wouldn't even worry about it, but keep that in mind for our August. This is aster yellows, that just pods just develop little bladders instead of pods filled with seed, and that's what happened in 7 and 12. And just a disaster. This is some of the fields that 1,200 pound, the stand was there for 3,000, and that's what ended up. So what I'm showing this is simply, we have no control measure, but we did find from Scott Hawley, had a few calls last year because I mentioned this. He had a blackleg trial at Langdon. And then all of a sudden here you see the yield way up and here's the different products you can't read, but headline, Quadris, and it's all for early blackleg control. So 2 to 3 leaf canola. Then Tundra way up here in yield. And here's the control down. But Tundra is an insecticide. So what that did is kill a little leaf hopper that spreads this phytoplasma. So if you're spraying canola in the spring, black or flea beetles are getting bad, you could head off this one. We don't spray to spray, but keep that in mind if we have southerly winds. And they talk about a lot of leaf hoppers down south. And so that's our only data we have, but it's the 1 year, but it was pretty impressive that Scott did. I guess that's probably it now because we'll have a panel coming. Keep everything in perspective whenever we're talking about anything.